Alright, hello everyone. In this lecture we're going to make a spar. So I've already got an assembly. You're going to open solidworks and go to new, make new part, and then instead of part you're going to click assembly. So I've got this assembly and I brought in this horizontal stabilizer that we made last time as a part to this assembly. So now that I have this, I'm going to insert a new part in the assembly. And you could rename this part by calling it, just double clicking, and we're going to name it spar. Perfect. And so it's important when you make a new part, it's going to want like a reference plane. So we're going to reference the front plane of the horizontal stabilizer that we made. And so that's for every new part you make, you're always going to want to reference the front plane of the horizontal stabilizer. And so now we're sketching on this front plane. We're going to go ahead and exit sketch, insert reference geometry plane. So right now we're going to create two planes, one that'll go like cross-sect here and one about here, and this is about the total length of the spar. So the first one we're going to go in and reference geometry, the front plane. How far do we want to go in? Well, it's arbitrary. You guys are obviously going to measure it. I'm just going to eyeball it. Let's go 8. Sure. And then I'm going to insert another one further away. Go 25. No, further. What about 45? Sure, 45. There we go. So the next thing, you're going to want to make surfaces on those planes. So we go into plane 1, sketch. Just pretty much sketch a really big rectangle. Just make sure it transcends the bottom and top of that airfoil. You don't really need to dimension it. Then go to surfaces, planar surface, and it'll make that into a plane. A surface that transects it. We're going to do the same thing for our second plane that we made. Go to sketch, corner rectangle, and just make it, oh, that's huge, but it'll do the job. I'm going to make it a little smaller so it's not that annoying. Okay, then we're going to go into surfaces, planar surface, like that. Great, so now we have two planes. The next thing we want to do, if we want to make like, let's say you want your spar to be at an angle, kind of like this sweep back we have here. All you have to do is sketch on the top plane. So if we hit the top plane and then sketch, we'll go here. And we'll just make this line. Click on the line for construction. Go ahead and give it some dimensions. So however you want to dimension it, you can dimension to the origin. Sure, we'll call it 11, and then we'll call this distance like, I don't know, 14 or something. Obviously you guys will be measuring. So that's pretty much the line that our spar will transect. And you could tell this thing's not fully dimensioned because this line's still blue. If you want to fully dimension it, you could give it another dimension. Sure. And so it's still not fully dimensioned. I don't know. I'm wondering what it's missing. But anyways, it turns black once it's fully dimensioned. One thing you can do to check is just try to drag this thing. And as it drags, that's how you know where the dimension is wrong. Well, you gotta get out of smart dimension. Okay, so clearly it's unconstrained somewhere, and it's that Y component. So if we make this dimension here, make it 0. Okay, now it's fully constrained. This line is now black. And I just wanted to show you guys that point because in the future, when you have multiple parts in this assembly, it could be a hassle, and making sure everything's fully constrained can sometimes help. So we got those dimensions down. Insert reference geometry plane. Put this line in the top plane. There it is. That's what we want. Looks good. You see how that goes across the line? Perfect. And now we're going to make a surface on that plane as well. Whoops, I got ahead of myself. You got to make a sketch on that plane. So click down here, sketch, corner rectangle. Yep. Perfect. Exit sketch. Surfaces. Planar surface. Got it. So we got all these planes. You can see how I'm doing this. One other thing we're going to want is to create one more plane. We're going to offset it from that other plane we just made. And this will be the thickness of your spar. So this is an important parameter for you to calculate, or, perhaps, again, this is just to give you the design tools, and you need to design. Perhaps you have multiple spars. Perhaps your design doesn't look like this at all. I just want to show you the tool set. So we're going to go there. I'm going to make this spar 0.2 inches thick, just because that's been a reoccurring theme. I made this airfoil 0.2 inch thick. That's probably pretty large, but again, that's for you guys to do research in. So you can see how there's that distance there. Now we're going to want to create the sketch on that plane. Great. We'll go to surfaces, planar surface. Alright, so we got these 4 planar surfaces, and it's separated at a certain thickness. One thing you could do is go into here. Alright, so now we're looking at it, and yeah, it looks pretty good. So that's the thickness of our spar. Probably looks a bit thin actually, but we'll stick with it. Just because. So the next thing we want to do is offset an entity. So go to offset surface. We want the underbelly of this airfoil, and right there I click the plane, which is not ideal. There we go. So we got the underbelly of our airfoil. We're offsetting it. We want to offset it 0 inches. So now we made another surface, and we're going to do a bunch of surface cuts pretty much. So the first surface cut is going to be pretty much all we want left is this surface here that I have highlighted, and this surface as well. But we want to trim it down so that just what's remaining is within that airfoil. So I'll walk you through that process. So if we go to trim surface, this will be our trim tool. And we'll want to remove sections. And we'll remove this part. So this will delete this purpley highlighted surface, and so we're left with just that. Again, we got to cut it down to the right distance. So a lot of trim steps. So what that did was delete that surface, and it kept the surface over here. So we'll do the same for this end to give the length of our spar. So we'll trim surface wherever the button went. There it is. Here's our trim tool. This will be our trim tool. We're going to want to delete this section. It's purple, great, all the way around. Awesome. So now we got the length of our spar set. Now we're going to want to trim. We want to trim like this plane surface so that we're only left with what's inside of this airfoil. So if we go to trim, here's our trim tool. We're going to remove sections. So it's going to be tricky to get this selected. There it is. You got to kind of move it around to get the right thing selected. And I'm not entirely sure if and it'll tell you what you select over here. We don't want that. We don't want that. We want that airfoil inside of there. Okay. So sometimes it's better to hide things. So if you, this is the outer one. So if you right click on this, right click on that and go to hide. That helps. And then we already got rid of, we used this plane, we no longer need it. So we could hide that, and same for this plane. These planes were just for determining the length of our spar. So those could be permanently hidden, and now we're left with, now we can finally see this undershell. Great, so we could always go back into the tree and show these planes. I'm just trying to determine what one's the inner and what's the outer. One way to do that is to click here. So surface plane 3 is the inner and surface plane 4 is the outer. So for now I'm going to hide the outer. And so we'll cut this airfoil with this plane here, and pretty much just going to cut this back side. Yeah. So if we go to trim surface, this will be our airfoil will be our trim tool this time, and we'll want to remove this section. So there it is. This is the backbone of our spar. Now let's get the front bone. So if we go to, we hid this plane, we could show it. Oops, sorry, we hid 4. I'll show that. Trim. Yep. Alright, so now we have these two. And so now we have geometry. So we could actually go into sketch, or sorry, features, lofted boss base. And we'll want to loft from here, oops, surface body 1 to surface body 2. And it will make a spar. And so now there is our spar. Again, we no longer need this shape, so we could hide it. This is just surface offset 1. And I made this spar here because the rudder, well, eventually there will be some sort of attachment, probably a hinge connection. So you'll need to drill into the spar and connect the rudder to it. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Another thing is like, I'm not sure of how many calculations you can do for spar, but I'm sure they're out there. Again, this video is just for MATLAB tools, so, or SolidWorks tools. So next video I'll tell you how to make a rib. and it involves, kind of like this procedure, a lot of surfaces and surface tools.